The Spanish Civil War. Today we'll look into how Spain had been split into two fighting factions and how the outside powers capitalized on this conflict. Spain had found itself in an awful position in the 19th century. After the French invasion came to an end in 1812, 12 successful coups took place, and several civil conflicts took place throughout the 19th century. However, after the Bourbons took power in 1874, Spain was relatively stable and stayed neutral throughout its years. This ended in 1923 with Miguel Primo de Rivera couping the government and forming a military government. After 8 years, the state failed in 1931 and a Republican government took power, and the flag also changed to a purple, which is very unique for world flags. During the early years of the Republic, several reforms took place, such as rights for women and equal land distribution. From 1931 to 1936, two major factions began to appear out of the Spanish Republic. There were the Phalangists, which were right-wing, highly conservative and religious, and wanted to put an end to the Republic. The other faction was the Republicans, which was more left-wing and became more socialist throughout the years. Their faction was united by a party known as the Popular Front. During 1936, the Popular Front won the elections, which led to the Phalangists beginning a coup on the 17th of July. Manuel Falconde and other Spanish officers, including Francisco Franco, had agreed to begin the coup on the 18th. However, the Republicans found out about the plot and the coup began a day earlier. Sanjuro was originally the leader of the Nationalists, but after his death in a plane crash, Franco took power. The Phalangists, which changed their name to the Nationalists, planned that the Army of Africa will seize Spanish Morocco and then move into Iberia to help with the coup. The coup mostly failed, with Republicans successfully defeating rebels in most cities, with the exceptions being Seville and the largely conservative areas of Leon. The Army of Africa under Franco successfully took control of the Canaries, the Spanish Sahara, and Spanish Morocco. However, they couldn't land into Spain due to the Republican Navy. This is where the outside powers become involved. Italy supplied the Nationalists with ships and men, and Germany provided them with planes. Thus, the Army of Africa landed in Cadiz and connected with rebels in Leon, and also Aragon. On August 18th, the Republicans held control of most of the Spanish cities and held the numerical advantage. However, the Nationalists were more organized, and as they approached Madrid, the Republicans fled to Valencia, and the Spanish people had to put up a last stand. That last stand would last nearly 3 years. Throughout 1937, the war had mostly been a stalemate, besides from some nationalist advances from the south and the fall of the Basque. Speaking of which, the Basque had always been in favour of the Republicans, due to their promises of autonomy for the people. Before their fall, the Germans had bombed the town of Guernica, which often symbolises the devastation of the Civil War, as largely known due to Pablo Picasso's painting descripting the scene. During 1938, the stalemate continued. However, clashes continued in Aragon. The Republicans failed at taking back Zaragoza, and eventually the Nationalists cut Catalonia from the Republicans. The Republicans were outmatched, and with the Western Allies staying neutral, and they also faced German and Italian units, Portugal also supported the Nationalists. Their only help was coming from the Soviets, and also the international brigades, but they were unorganized and done little to change the outcome of the war. In fact, there were pictures of Stalin in Madrid. People such as George Orwell visited the war-torn Spain, and especially Catalonia, which had developed into an anarchist territory. Infighting broke out between the Republicans. There were Democrats, Socialists, Communists, and Anarchists. The Nationalists controlled the agriculture-based areas and even sent bread to the enemy-controlled Madrid, urging the city to switch sides. Meanwhile, the Nationalists were mostly united, and the Carlist faction was mostly subdued under Franco. During the first months of 1939, Catalonia was swiftly occupied by Francoist forces. After Barcelona fell, Britain and France recognized the Nationalists as the true rulers of Spain, which infuriated the Republicans. The last nations which helped Spain, the Soviets and Mexico, had left during 1939 due to the fall of Barcelona, and yup, that's right, another coup. On March 4th, Nationalists in Cartagena began to rebel against the Republicans. Thus, the Republican Navy had to flee towards French North Africa, and making it even harder for Republicans to gain supplies from Allied nations. The Communists had enough of the government, and by March 12th, the Second Spanish Civil War was over with a Communist victory, and yet the First Civil War was still going on. The communists tried negotiating with Franco. After 2 weeks of failed negotiating, Franco began a second offensive and took over Madrid. By the end of March, Valencia fell. On April 1st, the civil war was over. Spain had been severely weakened after the conflict and stayed neutral throughout World War II. Although it was indirectly involved in the Eastern Front and Operation Felix, Spain tried to improve relations with the Western nations, but due to their colonies and authoritarian conservatism, they were isolated throughout the years. In 1947, Spain became a monarchy, but only had a monarch in 1969, with Juan Carlos of Bourbon becoming the monarch, but having no power. Due to the isolation, Spain only joined the UN in 1955. From 1959 to 1974, Spain was met with an economic miracle, and life continued to improve throughout the years. Spain only began decolonizing later on, with Spanish Morocco being given to Morocco in 1958, Ifni in 1969, and the Spanish Sahara being split by Mauritania and Morocco in 1976. In 1975, Franco died and his successors began to transition to democracy. By 1982, Spain had become a constitutional monarchy and a democracy, with them being one of the major members of the EU and a significant member of NATO. Francoist Spain is still a controversial topic, with some debating how fascist the nation really was, and some older generations who lived in Francoist Spain being supporters of the regime. Anyways, as always, thanks for watching, hope you learned something new, and check out everyone who helped out with the video.
Bite to eat. He wants no bull and a lot of talk that gives no bread and meat.
So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servant under him and no boss overhead. So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's a worker, his job is all his own. The liberation of the working class is the job for the worker alone. So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too.